Welcome to the Modern Mexico Podcast. I'm your host, Nathaniel Parish. On today's episode of the podcast, we're talking about Mexico's booming mezcal and tequila industry. This is a topic that I've researched quite a bit over the last 15 years. Overall, mezcal is an absolutely fascinating product. It connects some of the most isolated rural mountain communities in southern Mexico with consumers in the most sophisticated urban bars and restaurants in the world. There are some parallels with single origin organic coffee in that respect, but within the world of spirits, mezcal is still pretty unique. Whereas some premium spirits such as high-end vodka have garnered attention largely through successful marketing, mezcal really is a product with an incredibly complex history and flavor profile. Its unique aromas and tastes are derived from the flavors of the wild agaves that are used, from the soil, and from the wood that is used to roast the agave hearts in underground ovens. Most mezcal is still made using traditional processes, including crushing the agave with a horse-driven stone wheel called a tahona and letting it ferment in wooden barrels. Many stills continue to be heated with firewood rather than with more modern technology, and the end result is an incredibly unique product that absolutely deserves to be considered as one of the most complex and sophisticated drinks on the planet. Tequila, on the other hand, really has modernized and mechanized and is now produced on an industrial scale in the state of Jalisco. Mexico's exports of mezcal and tequila have surged over the last 10 years, and both industries are now going through some severe growing pains. On today's podcast, we're speaking to David Suro, one of the co-authors of a new book called Agave Spirits, The Past, Present, and Future of Mezcals. Hi, David. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, the first thing I wanted to ask you, if you can tell us about one of your first visits to a distillery in Jalisco.
Yes. Well, being from Guadalajara, you are in one way or another, you are going to be in contact with the tequila culture. I remember growing up and, when you drive through the city, was a couple landmarks of offices of big tequila companies. And I remember around in the mid-late 1970s, a friend of mine invited us to go and visit Cascawin, which is a tequila that is very popular. It was very popular at that time, just in Guadalajara and Arenal. That was pretty much known only by locals. So we went to visit that distillery, and we were fortunate enough to have Salvador Rosales Briseño, who allow us to walk into the distillery. And I still remember those black gates open that still looked exactly the same. And when you open those gates, the first thing that you see at the end of this driveway is the ovens. So, those ovens, they were loading the ovens. So it's a lot of, visually is beautiful to see the big agaves being cut in half and throw it inside the ovens. And another oven was steaming, and you can get the aromas of agave. So that was something that it created such an impact on me. So it's a distillery that I have a special attachment and respect, because it was my gateway to the tequila culture. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I know that for me, reading your book, it was really a lot of fun to kind of imagine what it was like to visit some of these places in the 1970s. And I also think that even now for people in Mexico or people visiting Mexico, sometimes visiting one of these mezcal or tequila distilleries can be kind of like a trip through time because you're seeing these processes and this culture that has been passed down through generations. Um, so I know that in the book you guys write about both tequila and mezcal, and I'm wondering if you can just help explain to listeners just how different the processes are to make mezcal and tequila today. And if you could pick one word to sum up each one of the processes today for making mezcal and for making tequila, what would the one word be for each product?
Mhm. Well, for mezcal, definitely it's tradition, uh, um, slash culture. The mezcal is a category that and it is one of probably the most interesting things about mezcal that is deeply connected to the ancestral Mexico with practices that go back millennia. And tequila, I will say, in a little bit sarcastic way, progress. Because the main difference between tequila and mezcal is that is the tequila is the vino mezcal de tequila, because remember the tequila at one point it was mezcal. There was no difference between mezcales from Oaxaca or San Luis Potosí or Michoacán or Jalisco. At one point, it was anything that was distilled from agave was known as mezcal. So the tequila for multiple reasons, and some of them it has to do with just the location. Like tequila and Amatitan and Arenal, which are the three main cities, towns to produce tequila. They have a very easy access. They are near the second largest city in Mexico. They are crossed by these very important roads that were connected Mexico City all the way to the Alta California, basically the entire west coast of Mexico. These roads were very important for economical development, uh, from early times of Mexico. So tequila was one more of the merchandises that can be uh, commercialized. So that's when the tequileros and the big hacendados see the opportunity. But having access to these markets, which is something that's happening right now, made them think in a ways they can produce faster and then be more productive, be more efficient. So tequila pretty much start to walk away from these old methods of production that require time. And tequila was not have the luxury of time. They need to produce and produce and produce. And that's how we see the industry start to evolve into from being traditional ancestral methods into more industrialized methods of production. And that's basically the big difference. And then regulations, when they arrive with regulations, when they start to impose regulations, the regulations make it even easier for mass production. And probably the most important, more relevant one is the that in order to call tequila tequila has to be produced only from one species of agave, which probably back then they were too early to assess the consequences, the ecological consequences this may have, because we basically create and promote a monocultive. And monocultives has been proved through centuries that they're not a good idea. Mother Nature don't like monocultures.
Hmm.
So tequila became very efficient again on the agro aspects. We select the agave to produce more offshoots. We select the agave to give us more sugar yield, and we produce the agave to take the shorter period of time to reach maturity. So it was a very efficient species of agave to produce more and faster.
Hmm.
So now, obviously, we are looking at some serious consequences, especially a genetic strength, which is minimized to almost no diversity, genetically speaking, with the consequences that that may have in the short term. So uh, mezcal is still pretty loyal to their foundation and the production and the culture to surround that category. And tequila now is an industrial commodity, basically.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that that's a very helpful dichotomy to kind of zoom in on here, this idea that, tequila has become a very mass scale industrial product, and
Mhm.
most mezcal is still, micro scale, still produced in a very artisan way using traditional methods. And I think some of that has to do with the geographical context. Jalisco is obviously a state that has benefited a lot during Mexico's modern era of industrialization and manufacturing, and some of the success of that industrial economy has maybe spilled over or helped develop the tequila industry, whereas Oaxaca is in southern Mexico. It's one of the least industrialized states in Mexico, and many of these mountain communities are, incredibly isolated and still very, very traditional. So it's helpful to kind of think about those two sides.
Yeah, but also obviously we cannot ignore that the category mezcal in the last 5-7 years it became extremely popular, and the accessibility is now not a challenge. It's not a is pretty much every palenque in Oaxaca has access to a road, and we have a rapid growth of the category, but probably faster than what the category can handle. Because remember one element, the species of agave.
Hmm.
The agave, even if it's a very long in terms of a crop to make it an alcohol beverage, I mean, it's not like any grain or sugar cane you know, or grapes that they are every year we have new crops. In the case of agave spirits is years. In the case of tequila, it's an average of 5 to 7 years, let's say an average. But in the case of mezcal, a lot of these beautiful species of agaves that they are part of the rich biodiversity of Oaxaca, they are very longevic plants. They are plants to need, 15, 20, up to 35 years to develop. But the growth of the category in Oaxaca and Puebla and other states that are protected under the denomination of origin, the growth is not, uh, at the same pace of the demand. So here is where we are now seeing a lot of species, especially the wild species of agave, they use to produce mezcal, in danger of extinction. I mean, we have about 60% of the species, the wild agaves in the denomination of origin, they are in the list of danger. So, I mean, this rapid growth in an era that is faster to grow, in an era where agave spirits are in, um, it has challenges that we never see before. How we can balance, how we can compensate the popularity of these spirits with the accessibility to you know sustainable plantations, and it's not just the agave. We also had to take in consideration that most of the production of mezcal is done in peat ovens. So the amount of wood that the production of mezcal is demanding nowadays It brings another challenge, which is deforestation. And when you start to add these challenges, it's time for us to really pay attention and to see how we're going to be able to protect the future of these spirits that we love.
Hmm.
And I mean, we can go also on the list the use of water. I mean, it's a lot of water required to produce 1 liter of tequila, and it is, you know, it's a lot of these areas. They are not necessarily a rainforest, and where you have lots of rain precipitation. I mean, some of the areas of the denomination of origin, they are arid or semi-arid terrains, experience already, a challenge on water resource. So, I mean, the list of things that we are not really paying attention is getting longer, and we are being very successful as a category to continue to grow and to attract more consumers. So, it is time for us as a consumer, as a responsible consumers, to start to see what the alternatives are, how we can balance the demand. I lost sleep many, many times trying to think of what is the solution. And you go down to economics. I mean, it's basically economics. And, I think the only way that we can balance this is to drink less and pay more.
Hmm.
I mean, if somebody else have another solution, I will be very happy to hear.
So you've talked a little bit about this tremendous growth that we've seen in mezcal, and of course, over the last 20 years, we've also seen, tremendous growth in consumption of exports of tequila from Mexico to the U.S.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm wondering, some of these factors that you're talking about in terms of scarcity of the inputs and other issues, how would you characterize the overall level of risk for the agave spirits industry in Mexico right now? What level of risk would you assign it if you had to think about a traffic light?
It's a high risk. It's red. It's red. It's definitely, we're not on Jello, because we are dealing with an agriculture product, and again, with a very, very long process of cycles of agriculture. So sooner rather than later, we are going to, as I mentioned to you, is more than half of the wild agave is already on the list of danger of extinction. We are not having these agaves anymore. We are at the time where yeah, I will say red light is where we are right now. And I don't want to sound very dramatic and or overly pessimistic, but it's a reality. When you have more than 60% of the species, the wild species, in danger, and when you have an agave tequilana weber, that most of the populations of agave tequilana weber, they are infested with picudo, and the amount of uh, agrochemicals they are required in order to protect these plantations. Um, it is a challenging times. Did you see the prices of agave lately? I mean, in my year where we were, well, 5 years ago, we experienced more than 400% increase on the price because the scarcity of inventories for agave tequila and Weber. And now it collapsed almost overnight because we have lots of inventories of agave. But this generates a very traumatic impact on farmers. And one of the things that we've seen right now is farmers have actually, no value in their crops. So they are abundant their crops. and therefore there is no treatment to these agave fields. So the increase and the spread of disease is going farther and farther. Eh, They are crises that unfortunately, when we realize how bad they are, is sometimes when it's too late. So we we have to really involve everybody, producers, government, but more than anything, consumers. I think the consumer is fundamental because, again, at the end of the day, it's economics what drives everything. You have farmers, they are in social and economical stress. And obviously, if you're going to tell them, hold on, don't do it, you basically tell them, hold on, don't eat, don't feed your families. You
Hmm.
know, so it is a team effort in the whole chain of production and commercialization of agave spirits. Um, and a key player is the government. The regulations. I think there is time for the industry to review the regulations, because the regulations for tequila, they were done in pretty much another era. You know, it's almost from a past century. So what tequila is today, it may be not representative of what it was when they designed those regulations. And the mezcal regulations are pretty much a copy paste of the tequila regulations that they don't apply to mezcal. So these type of changes, they are needed. They have to come from the government. A lot of people think it's the regulatory council of tequila and mezcal who has to do that, but no, they don't have to do it. They not the institutions who have to change regulations. Remember, they are only regulators. They are only institutions to verify and certify, and I will put question marks in those two duties. But they are supposed only to verify and certify that the producers comply with the federal government, federal regulations. So the government, I think, is time to take a very thorough evaluation of these emblematic and economically important uh, products that Mexico produce.
Hmm. So I think that's a very important point. On the one hand, both mezcal and tequila are these, tremendous success stories where a lot of different companies have had a lot of success producing these products in Mexico and exporting them to the US and to the rest of the world. But at the same time, as you mentioned, right now the level of risk facing the industry is a red light level of risk, and that might not be something that consumers all over the world are aware of. And something that I think is interesting is that red light level of risk about the sustainability of the industry is taking place in a context of immense profitability for the sector. I saw a statistic that right now, the market for tequila and mezcal in the US is nearly $7 billion a year. And Diageo, the giant company that owns Don Julio and Casamigos and some mezcal companies, recorded operating profit of around $6 billion last year. So, given the context of that level of profitability for the biggest companies in the sector, it seems like some of the problems that the industry is dealing with might be a little bit self-inflicted. For instance, in your book, you talk about the problems that companies are facing in their efforts to recruit and train highly skilled jimadores who cut and prepare the agave for cooking and processing. And it just seems to me like a classic economics problem. If you're struggling to recruit people to do this job, it might just be that the wages that companies are offering are no longer enough to entice people in Jalisco to get into, a job that has some benefits of being traditional and being interesting, but is also very difficult and sometimes painful to do. Um, in general, just one of my takeaways was that it seems like some of the brands in the industry might be prioritizing maximizing shareholder returns or maximizing short-term profits at the expense of implementing sustainable practices and paying the workers in Mexico fair wages. And it made me think about something, which is when I was working on my book, I traveled to Oaxaca to write about Mezcal. And I also just wanted to ask about the context in Oaxaca. And I'm wondering, in the course of your career and your work, have you seen that the booming Mezcal industry has really had a positive impact on the economy in Oaxaca? And I'm wondering if you can give a letter grade to explain the impact that Mezcal has had on economic development in Oaxaca.
Mhm. Well, yeah, no. I mean, the short answer is I don't think at the level of success, economically speaking, is reflecting the level of success socially or economically for most of their communities. We see the classic phenomenon, an example of a huge conglomerates to invest in a product in to extract a product that first of all they don't understand. When you have a CEO uh, of these conglomerates that they have such a diverse portfolios in all over the world. Um, I don't think, and I don't blame them. They really understand how fragile these structures and these productions are because again they're not dealing with agriculture products, they're dealing with grapes and sugarcane and grains, and a lot of these can come from anywhere in the world, and as long as you have a distillery you can mass produce. Here you're dealing with a product that is like no other in the world of alcohol beverages. So not understanding the impact they may have in their communities, instead of help them, you can bring some new problems to their communities because at the end of the day, and I know this for some of the people who's listen to us, it's not all about money. I mean, these communities they've been working, they've been producing mezcales, not with the main incentive to be poor or rich. They've been producing these mezcales, yes, because it's part of their traditions, it's part of their religions, it's part of their everyday life. And agaves are not only used for make alcohol beverages. Agaves have many, many different uses. So when we arrive to these states like Oaxaca, and we start to extract and demand volumes that they are not capable to do it, we put everything on balance. And unfortunately, financially, I don't think they're compensated properly. So it's some sort of like gentrification in the communities where they start to generate money, but not enough to really, or they don't have the same visions that we have, or a corporation may have to invest in grow orderly and in an orderly way and to see the future. This is communities that for millennia they they have a different way of think, and I think it's much better than the way we think because we think short-term benefits. These people they being able to keep balances on their ecosystems, on their lives, on their families. So I don't think in terms of social, economical, and ecological terms, can give an A or a B or a C. I think if you see the communities today and the level of poverty today, I will give an F, because we still have these states that are protected. That's a such a weird word to use, but they're
Hmm.
protected by the denomination of origin of mezcal. Still the states that have the highest levels of poverty in Mexico. And if you think of it, if we talk about billions of dollars, they've been generated by these communities because they produce, they are the ones to generate the product. But the way they've been trickled down to them is almost nothing. It's still a dry season when it comes in terms to receive benefits. There is no benefits at the level that the industry is been showing their numbers. I mean, yeah, $7 billion. Just imagine to invest on those states, half of that. I mean, we should have at least some schools for their kids or hospitals, clinics, the more agriculture infrastructure, better training facilities. Nothing of that exists. Ironically, the only um, or people who is doing in the right way is peoples who are still traditional producers and then don't have these huge alliances with transnationals. You have mezcaleros in Oaxaca that they're just working in favor of their communities. And it's being spilled some of the success of the category to their brands, but they not necessarily decide to sell themselves to a big corporation.
Hmm.
So I would like to see more benefits in all the different ways to the communities, and not just in Oaxaca, but across the denomination of origin of mezcal and tequila.
Hmm. So I think that, some people might find that to be interesting, that we're talking about a, $1 billion a year industry. But you give the mezcal industry an F in terms of the economic development that it's actually been able to catalyze in Oaxaca. And I think that that's interesting, and it might reflect kind of a big picture issue that maybe at the macro level in Oaxaca, the mezcal industry has not been transformative. It hasn't totally changed the economic dynamic there, but maybe for some particular families there has been a positive impact, but it's
Of
not
course,
it's not an absolute boom the way some export industries and some particular communities in the world transform the entire economy of the town or the state. We're not seeing that in Oaxaca. And
you see how big companies, in order to be able to bring more leaders into their production, they are outsourced across their communities in Oaxaca or other states, and then they, bring all the leaders of these communities into put into one big brand. But the amount of money they get paid for their mezcal is not sustainable. It's not sustainable at all.
hmm yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of micro level picture fits in with the macro picture in Oaxaca. I looked up recently some of the statistics on Oaxaca, and I know that Oaxaca is still rated as being the third poorest state in Mexico,
Yeah,
and around two-thirds of the residents in Oaxaca live below the poverty line. And
yeah.
it's true that that's fallen by a few percentage points since 2018. So there have been some improvements over the last couple of years, especially with
Hmm.
new social programs and different income subsidy schemes. But overall, the poverty rate in Oaxaca is still double the national average, and many of these communities are really some of the poorest communities, not only in Mexico, but in the entire Western Hemisphere. And um,
I guess. I just want to bring to your attention another factor that is not in these metrics.
Hmm.
Again, it's not all about economics.
Yeah.
How much, what's the value of the species of agave that we extend? How much money it will be representative of having this deforestation across the states of, you know, covered by denominations of origin. How much it costs the damage due to these practices is going to cost to future generations. It's on the trillions probably, because we are basically destroying ecosystems that took millions of years to be create and balance. So again, metrics, they have the tendency to just focus on economics, but how much it costs to lose all these other things that trickle down into it. You know, how much it costs the migration, because these economics, these numbers, these levels of poverty, remember, they generate incentives for people to migrate from their communities. Okay, so how much it costs to dismantle families and throw these individuals into such a aggressive and inhumane environment that we live in right now, as far as immigrations and how immigrants are being perceived now. I mean, those are how you put metrics on that, how you value that. I
Hmm.
mean, if I lose one of my kids due to economics issues, and it has to migrate, and my family. I mean, I will that will not be valued in millions of dollars. You know, those are the things that consumers also have to take in consideration. We not just one of the things that can be very distractive is money, is economics. Oh, it's millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and some families are benefit. No, per capita, no.
Hmm.
And that's why I say it's an F, because for me to lose one species of agave is is no value. It's above value. It's above economics. It's above economics. You're talking about an agave species that took millions of years, and in a matter of a decade, we eliminated for the face of the planet. That's economics. How much that cost?
So I know when I was working on the field work for my book, I had the chance to spend some time in Oaxaca, and I uh, brought a tent with me to a town called San Baltasar, and I set it up a few meters away from Mezcal Palenque, and I had the chance to spend several days, living alongside these guys, waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning and making mezcal with them. And I still have all of these incredibly visceral memories, of the bright pumpkin orange color of the roasted agave, and the textures and the smells have really, stayed with me years later. And one of the interesting things that I saw was that a lot of these guys in this town in Oaxaca had previously worked in California. In the past, they had been migrant laborers, and they had come
Mhm.
back to their hometown, and they had found jobs in the mezcal industry. And that was one of my takeaways, was that, maybe they weren't becoming millionaires, but they were at least coming back to their hometowns, finding a way to make a living and trying to figure out how to preserve their traditional way of life in the modern economy. And something that I thought was really interesting was that the master distiller that I wrote about, he told me that he still struggled to communicate in Spanish, and he still thought in Zapoteco. And he also said that when he had the chance to travel and try to promote his mezcal to consumers, that he really just felt too shy, and he felt like he was out of his element, and he kind of realized maybe he had some limitations, and he had the, generations of knowledge about how to make mezcal, but he also realized that he really wasn't the type of charismatic entrepreneur who could continue to grow and build up his brand. And so he had found a way to partner with some other outside entrepreneurs, and he made enough money to support his family and to send, he had plans to send his kids to college, and his hope was that his kids would study things like accounting or business administration or chemistry, and they would move on into professional jobs, and maybe within his operation or within the mezcal industry, or just in other jobs in professional fields. So I did see that maybe on the micro level there is some positive impact from mezcal, but it's not like a gold rush of what you might expect a $1 billion boom to look like at the local level. And you already talked about it a little bit today, but I know that one thing that really stood out to me in your book is just this idea of market failure when it comes to agave production in Mexico. And as you said, many of these agaves can take 5, 10, 20, you mentioned even 35 years to grow. And so that's like a built-in bottleneck. Every single year, the industry needs products that aren't necessarily on a timeline to be ready every single year. And it does seem like this is a classic example where the market has basically failed to create a sustainable pipeline of agave, but at the same time, this is a classic example where government intervention could play a very positive role in helping to coordinate and encourage production or create schemes for cultivating different strains of agave with a 10, 20-year plan. But it also seems that we don't really see that. Like there is this tremendous opportunity of underutilized mountain landscapes in different states in Mexico, and we don't see a massive government-led effort to um, educate communities about growing and cultivating and harvesting these agaves over the course of their lives. Maybe for some people, harvesting a particular strain of agave 2 times during the course of their life might be the timeline that we're looking at, which is kind of crazy to think about. Um, but I'm also just wondering, when we think about some of these problems and we talk about this red light level of risk for the agave spirits industry in Mexico, I'm wondering, how optimistic are you about the path forward? Are you confident that people in this industry are going to find a path that protects the industry's long-term future, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic because there is a lot of people. I mean, you're a good example, who get it, and there is lots of different things that we have to do from our trenchers, as educators, as responsible bar owners, as responsible bartenders, as responsible consumers. And I think the uh, putting together all these strategical, positive um, ideas into how we can do this industry more sustainable in terms of ecology, biodiversity, and social. For example, I sometimes when I hear that a father, a palenquero, a tabernero, uh, obviously wants to see their kids to get better than them because we still have a generations that producers who were abused and they were always discriminated in every way of the form war discrimination, economical discrimination, historical discrimination, social discrimination. Mexico is a very classist society. So a lot of these maestros, they don't want their kids to continue to go into that cycle. But what if we also work with producers and make them feel that it's a future, not just necessarily as a doctor or as a lawyer or as an economist for their kid, but it's even brighter future if they continue to grow their palenque or their taberna, but in a way that it can be, sustainable, and it can be a part of pride, not a shame. But a lot of these mezcaleros, remember, just a couple decades ago, they were persecuted, you know, and their products were considered illegal. And here is also, I think, politically, we never had the willingness, politically speaking, to understand that these communities cannot perceive laws and regulations the same way that a big, executive in the tequila industry or in the clothing business. I mean, this is communities that they were marginated. They were always working in a different level, and for us to start to bring them and to slowly help them to incorporate their culture and their businesses into a model that can be successful, but at the same time, that success also reflects in their culture that they represent, which at the end of the day is what bring us to mezcal and tequila. That mystery, that mysticism, those unknown areas of mezcal, they are fascinated, because I don't think the mezcal attracts consumers just by the flavors of the aromas. I think we are almost fascinated, I can use that term, of, to see a little palenque in the middle of nowhere, producing this magical elixir. Well, those type of things, I think, is part of a future sustainable mezcal and bacanora and sotol and all these agave spirits produced in Mexico. To see not just as a goal, because to be a lawyer means mission accomplished as a parent, to have an educated, no, I mean, who's going to take care of those palenques? Who's gonna see the future of the palenque? Um, I mean, I see examples across the category where we see um, the sons of palenqueros and taberneros that they have a college degree, but they come back to their palenques and they have a great vision of the world, but they back to the palenque, you know, and they are proud of their palenques. So all these things, is a big future for agave spirits. Yes, to educate the next generations, but not education that's to mean that you have to go somewhere else to be successful. You can be successful within your family business. I mean, for me, out of my three kids, only one of them has a college degree, and the other two don't, but they are fully engaged in the restaurant business and the spirit business. They have obviously a level of education, but uh, for me, success is not for them to show me a college degree. It will be great, but for them to be able to perceive the future and the pride on the family business, that's the college degree, you know. And in the mezcaleros and tequileros, uh, yeah, we should incentivize them, and we should help them we should talk to them more about how unique their culture, their tradition, their family, their products are. but not to go there to try to take advantage of them,
Hmm.
because that's what is really, I mean, I see so many projects that they go there, they tell them such a beautiful stories. They give them I bring your product to United States, I grow your business, you're gonna be wealthy, and those promises sometimes they are not the same. They don't reflect what they were done. They were meaning when they were presented to them. I think the future is also where the palenqueros, where the families have control of the products, when they have control of the price that they're going to sell the product. And for us to be able to understand as a consumers that the price is like an spirit that it costs 10 times more labor, 10 times, 20 times more time to source the raw material. There is connected with millennia, is a knowledge that is being inherited from generation to generation. How much is the value of knowledge? I mean, a palenquero right now, like some of the maestros that I work with the project of Mesonte, they are in the middle of the region that is now under study for pre-Columbian distillations. And you have a maestro mezcalero that is being able to maintain the knowledge that it comes from thousands of years. That is priceless. That is priceless. So, and we see the cases of some of these maestros where their kids are doing the reverse migration. But, you want them to do the reverse migration not because dad is getting old or not because, you're going to make some, you know, living that is going to be, up to everyday living. I mean, you want to generate enough income and in order for these families to be able to start to see not just how you're going to feed the family or educate, but how you're going to grow your business in the way that it can be secure for generations to come. Yeah.
So I think that that's interesting and helpful to think about. You've detailed all of these risks and threats that are facing the industry, but you also say that you're cautiously optimistic about the
Yeah.
future for the sector. And I think maybe one of the pieces of good news for the families that are producing mezcal or maybe producing smaller brands of tequila in Mexico is that the geography, the history, the culture, the biology, the chemistry, all of the factors that go into the incredibly complex flavors of high-end tequilas and mezcals are part of the story. And
Yep.
so there's definitely an opportunity here for smaller producers to tell the story behind their products and to get their story out there to the world. And at the same time, for consumers who are passionate about drinking mezcal or drinking tequila and studying the history of these products and studying the story behind the different brands that they're consuming, there's a real chance here for them to really learn about each particular company, and with mezcal. Uh, is the mezcal made in a traditional underground oven or is it made in an industrial facility? As a consumer, which one do you prefer when it comes to consuming mezcal? When it comes to tequila, are you consuming a tequila that is 100% agave or one that is a mixture of sugarcane or other sugars? Are you producing one that has some type of interesting process behind it, or is it a fully industrialized process? And I think in your book, you describe some processes that I had never seen before or heard about, and it's hard
Hmm.
to imagine
Hmm.
something, so far removed from the traditional stone grinding and oven roasting that was the kind of the origin story for these spirits. And now you have some products that are, they've fully gone practically in the direction of being like almost like a Coca-Cola. Um, so I think for consumers, that's an important question to answer. Which one are you consuming? Which one would you like to consume? Is that an important question for you to answer? Um,
Let's be realistic. I'm sorry, but let's be realistic. The mass consumption and the mass market is going to dominate always every spirit in the world. What we want is just to not to destroy that market, not to, but we want to do is to increase the other niche, which is, you know, products that are linked to producers who are doing the right things. Because believe it or not, the impact of one of those mezcaleros, one of those taberneros in the ecosystems are crucial, even for the benefit of the big brands, to preserve agave species, to still making this statement, making the tell the people, tell the world that it's an option, there is an alternative. We need those small producers. And that's why I'm get very, very disturbed when I saw big brands start to go and outsource mezcales from these small guys, because sooner rather than later, they will completely absorb those mezcaleros and they became just cheap labor. you know they don't became the players and the influencers in terms of biodiversity and sustainability. They just became two arms and two legs and a very easy and cheap access. So it's very important to create awareness of what is the impact, not just again in the economics, but in not having that producers that still are the anchor for the agave spirits. That's fundamental. Yeah.
so definitely, and something that I think is interesting is if you talk to someone who has never sipped a glass of mezcal before, I think it's very hard to explain, just how complex it is, right? It really one of the ideas that you express in your book is that mezcal really should be considered as one of the most complex substances that a human being can
Hmm.
sip and consume and enjoy. It really is one of the most, sophisticated and interesting profiles of any product on Earth. And in that line of thought, I also think that your book is both flavorful and complex. And I thought in a lot of ways it's kind of like a glass of mezcal in the sense that you have so many different factors that you're talking about and explaining and so much complexity in there. And for me, I thought that it was really best consumed in small sips. I read it over the course of a few weeks where I would start the day reading one chapter a day and having a new angle to think about. And I really enjoyed reading it and that at that slow pace and having the chance to kind of savor it and reflect over it.
Well, you have to remember one thing. You had the best master distiller in words. That
Hmm.
is my co-writer and mentor, Gary Natham. The style of narrative on the book is Gary. It's Gary. Gary is, I mean, he published more than 30 books. And Gary's vision and perception and the angle, the way he see our beloved industry is incredible. That's what it makes the book so delicious, so tasty. He distilled it in the narrative uh, incredibly. I mean, I consider myself just, you know, a little part of the process, but the master distiller is pretty much Gary Natham. I don't even like to call my book.
Hmm.
It's Gary's book with the companion of David Suro, which is not even close to these incredible way to describe such a complex topics. uh, that surround this incredible category of spirits. Yeah, and I get very frustrated because most of the people who are doing an incredible job in helping people to get more interested on the category, but the tendency of these people who are influence the category are only focused on tasting notes as the main focus, a nom number and a tasting notes. I think that it's time for um, people who are successful in having great social media networks and to start to focus in these other issues. A nom number. Okay, what is behind a nom number? What is behind those gates? In the case of the 1123 as Cascawin, behind those gates is transparency, is ethics, is traceability. But a lot of these brands who are spending lots of money on marketing and create these fancy stories and attracting and seducing so many influencers, they really not adding much of the desperately needed conversations of above and beyond anisette flavors, vanilla flavors, and yeah, I think now the category is reaching a point where we have enough amazing people interesting on the category, very well spoken people, great tools of access, marketing, Instagram, this type of Zooms, this type of interviews. But I think we are now in the point where we have to start to also direct the attention to more sustainable conversations, more social conversations. We really have to be very honest and very transparent and celebrate, but also to question topics that are not probably sound beautiful. I mean, I don't even want to go to the celebrity stuff.
Hmm.
We have all these outsiders which have the potential to have a incredibly positive impact. But I think we're missing the opportunity to use all these outsiders, which it should be a complement to the family heritage, the family knowledge, and to grab all that beautiful category and those beautiful stories of palenqueros and mezcaleros and tequileros and take it to another level of appreciation. Because for me, I way ago I decided not to focus on organoleptic descriptors. Um, the organoleptic descriptors can be very deceiving and very subjective, but the story of a tequilero or the story of a mezcalero is real. It's very real. So how we can highlight that pride in that maestro, that heritage that he's carried on his shoulders, and how much we have to celebrate that he preserved traditional methods, you know, because for me, a good tequila or a good mezcal or a good bacanora, a good sotol is not about the jasmine, floral, herbal flavors. For me, is what is in the making, how the farmer, how the agriculture practices, how traceable is that raw material, you know, how hard that farmer has to work. I mean, you sleep over right next to a palenque, and you see these people. They work almost around the clock in order to monitor a perfect distillation, because there is no computers, there is no way that you can, adjust the temperature and the distill is how much wood you're going to put there, what type of wood you put in there. That's flavor. That's what mezcal is different from any other beverage in the world. And when you're dealing with such a complex raw material, as we describe, Gary and I describe in the book, a raw material like no other in the world of alcohol beverages, that's the focus. How respectful the producer is to that raw material. Because the most respectful that producer is to the raw material, therefore, we're going to have wonderful results. You know,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So definitely, I think that that is maybe if we do have a reason to be cautiously optimistic about the future of the sector, maybe it just is that the complexity behind the product does lend itself so well to storytelling, and there is an opportunity here for people within the industry to really tell the story and connect with consumers
Mhm.
over the story behind the product. And I
And I
def
thank people like you,
yeah.
and I thank people like you for doing it. I mean, for you to go and have a 10 in the middle of the Sierra Madre in Oaxaca, that that is remarkable. That is beautiful. People like you are fundamental in that storytelling. How are we going to be able to bring the attention to that moment at 5 o'clock in the morning, you know, that moment at 8 o'clock at night, you know, that walk for miles in the mountains to source agave. That storytelling, I think it has more potential than a beautiful glass where the mezcal is presented to us, or who gives the doors to that bottle.
Hmm. So yeah, definitely. As I said, some of those memories for me, they might have some of my field work in Oaxaca I did over 10 years ago, and I still remember all
Mm,
of the details of it, the mezcal trickling out of the still, some of the smells and the flavors, and, getting the chance to ride around with these guys in trucks and, play basketball in the evening and help unload agaves from a truck.
mhm.
Just a lot of fun and a totally unique experience. And definitely one of my favorite things I've written about in all of my time in Mexico.
It
And
changed. Those experiences change our lives. Yeah,
and
yeah.
definitely. And anyone who wants to check it out, my book is out there and it is called Searching for Modern Mexico. And I would also encourage everyone who's listening to check out your book, which is called Agave Spirits, and is just a really fun read as well. And I really just want to say it was really fun to chat with you today. And I want to say thanks so much for joining us on the Modern Mexico podcast.
Thank you for doing what you do.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Modern Mexico podcast. If you like what you heard in the podcast today, check out my book, Searching for Modern Mexico, which is available on Amazon. The next episode of the podcast is coming soon. Until then, hasta luego, amigos.